Look, the Prime Minister Modi is in Japan. He is having one-to-one meetings with the Prime Ministers of Japan, of the Prime Minister-elect of Australia, and he will also be meeting President Joe Biden. There will be the meeting of the Quad, a very important meeting given that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is still on. I think it's time for India to raise some very seminal questions and issues about the geostrategic direction of Quad per se. It cannot be reduced to just a talk shop or for all the non-controversial issues like tsunami relief and trade matters. These are important in themselves. But the primary underpinning of Quad is a security issue, a security imperative of how to balance the rising economic and military power of an increasingly aggressive China that has been throwing its weight about in the South China Sea, against Taiwan, in the East China Sea, and now it has been for the last few years been particularly aggressive against Ladakh. So the fact of the matter is, we cannot wish away the security underpinnings of Quad, which is primarily the rationale, the basic rationale for the getting together of this quadrilateral of democracies who are feeling threatened by the skyrocketing rise, military rise of an aggressive China. And we have to deal with it. We have to create an Asian balance of power. That will not come by just trade and sweet talk. It will have to be backed up by muscular force. Yes, we are carrying out joint military exercises. In fact, the navies of the Quad had all come together. The French Navy had sent its aircraft carrier, so had the British Navy sent the aircraft carrier, etc., to show the solidarity in this project of balancing the power of a rising China. But the simple thing is, we have to go beyond generalities and inane platitudes to get to the crux of the security issues. The first question that I think we need to very clearly ask the United States is that who is the primary adversary of the United States? Is it China or is it Russia? Geopolitical pundits like Professor Dr. Henry Kissinger, Professor Mearsheimer, and a number of other strategic thinkers have been articulating for long that America needs to define its primary threat. Which is the primary threat, which is secondary? You see, it had articulated a pivot to Asia, a shift towards Asia to balance the peer group competitor of China. Russia cannot economically match the United States. Demographically, it is a declining power, and to that extent, the threat to the United States is much lesser. Unfortunately, the United States and Europe have needlessly pushed Russia. They have recklessly expanded NATO eastwards, and when Russia defined its red lines as Ukraine and Georgia, they showed scant regards. They were callous in trying to push Russia to a point where it would strike out. So to a large extent, as Professor Mearsheimer says, America is responsible for the attack that Russia has launched on Ukraine. Now the point is, the entire pivot to Asia has gone for a 6, and all the attention, resources, money, power, weapons are diverted to Europe. Now the United States has to decide whether it wants to take on Russia and China together, and whether that is a rational and intelligent foreign and security policy. Henry Kissinger had said it should be settled maxim of American foreign policy never to take on more than one Asian power at a time. America unfortunately had its military credibility in tatters when it withdrew from Afghanistan in that disgraceful fashion. And even now, when push came to shove in Ukraine, America and NATO refused to put boots on the ground. They refused to enforce a no-fly zone. They have just been supplying weapons and cheerleading Ukraine to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. That's not a very edifying sight. Ukraine has been devastated. At least the eastern part of Ukraine has been devastated. 40 cities are in rubble and ruin. And America initially gave just Stinger missiles and Javelin anti-tank guided missiles, which were more. They expected Ukraine to get knocked out in conventional military battle, not last for more than a few days, and they were providing weapons for the guerrilla phase, for guerrilla warfare against the Russian occupying army. But Russia never aimed at occupying the whole of Ukraine. It only wanted the eastern part, and in the eastern part too, its territorial objectives were limited to Donbass and the Crimean coast, which it has more or less taken. Whatever is left, it will take in a matter of time now. Mariupol has surrendered. So, American support was rather dismal. I'm afraid it will, despite all the propaganda on Facebook, on Twitter, on social media, on television and the print media, announcing a victory for Ukraine. As Professor Nalpat said, if this is victory, I shudder to think what defeat would look like. So we have to be very, very circumspect, and we have to spell out and ask our American and Quad partners, who is the main threat? Is a pivot to Asia still operative when the entire American attention and resources have been diverted back to Europe? Was it the best policy to provoke both powers at the same time? And is it wise to push Russia into the arms of China? These are seminal questions, existential questions for the Quad. We cannot get around by just being a sweet talk shop kind of a thing. The second thing that I wish to emphasize is that India, in its own long-term national security interest, we have to grow beyond knee-jerk tactical reactions. We have to think strategic, we have to think long-term about the security of Asia and our own security in the Asian theatre. For this, the two poles that are most essential to counter China are India and Japan. And India and Japan must co-opt in this coalition of those who are threatened by China: South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and at a point in time, we must also cooperate very majorly with Taiwan. All these countries are threatened by China. Please remember that China's budget is larger than all the budgets of India, Japan and all these Asian smaller countries put together. It is almost 2.5 times that of the budget of India, or 4 times the budget of India, at $270 billion to India's $72 billion. You can see the disparity. This is where Japan helps. This is where Vietnam and South Korea help, because they suck away or they draw away a lot of Chinese military resources, especially Vietnam and Taiwan and Japan. So it is in our interest that if we just have a quasi-military alliance, we can scatter Chinese military resources, not let them be concentrated against any one particular country. All the Chinese 2,500 fighters and aircraft, combat aircraft, cannot be concentrated against India, because China has to cater for United States, it has to cater for Japan, it has to cater for South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, all of these put together. So quite obviously the best way to scatter Chinese military resources, prevent their focusing against India, is to have this quasi-military alliance with Japan. Japan is a major technological power. India and Japan can cooperate. India needs to be Atmanirbhar by establishing a military industrial complex in its own country. And for this we need the private sector to cooperate majorly with the firms in Japan, so that factories can be established here to jointly produce a lot of defense equipment, achieve economies of scale, sell it at lower prices to the other Southeast Asian countries that are threatened. Like India is selling the BrahMos. India will be selling the light combat aircraft to Philippines. So there is a lot of potential to work together for especially lowering the individual costs of production of military equipment. India needs help in military engines, fighter aircraft engines, ship engines especially. We have been trying to get these from Russia, from Ukraine, and now we cannot. So we need to diversify, we need to go take the help of Japanese firms. The Japanese can help us make the Soryu class submarines, which Australia is also now going to buy. And we can also develop minesweepers jointly. The Japanese can help us in a lot of other equipment. The Japanese are developing a 5th generation fighter aircraft, so is India. Why can't we pool resources? Why can't we come up with a common design or which can be jointly produced to get economies of scale, benefit both the countries, get the best of the technologies? India and Japan can cooperate in the field of artificial intelligence and robotics, especially unmanned ground vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, etc. A lot of these robotics, Japan is very highly advanced and could be of tremendous help and benefit to India. In cyber security domain, we can both cooperate and do each other a lot of good service. Then India is a major missile power. India is a major rocket power. It has been launching satellites. It can help Japan in the launch of its satellite, in developing space launcher vehicles, if helping Japan produce missiles if required. Japan would also be happy to get the BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles or any of these other type of missiles that we are developing. A lot of this could be co-developed. Japanese electronics with Indian design skills can go a very, very long way. India is now a major hub for the production of howitzers, 155mm class howitzers. We could sort of share these designs, produce them on a larger scale. And one of the test cases was for the US-2 amphibious aircraft. Somehow the bureaucracy just killed it. Despite the top leaders of the two countries wanting to have strategic cooperation, enhance strategic cooperation, this project was killed by the bureaucracy on both sides and by very limited commercial outlook. We have to go beyond commerce because this is a strategic alliance and partnership. You must be aware that India and Japan have signed a civil nuclear cooperation agreement. Now, after what has happened in Ukraine, the rest of the world has woken up. You do need nuclear weapons if you have to save yourself from a nuclear armed power, which China is 350 nuclear warheads. So I would think that on a civilizational scale, India must offer assistance to Japan whenever it decides to go the nuclear route for its own defense and protection. How much can it rely on an American umbrella? How reliable will that American umbrella be? So I think the best India can do is that to two countries, India can sign a treaty of peace and cooperation, peace and friendship treaty like we had signed with the Soviet Union just before the 1971 war, that enjoined the two countries to immediately consult one another in case they faced any major threat, including a nuclear threat. Japan is a Buddhist country. Civilizationally, we are tied since the times of the Buddha, and in recent times they helped Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA. India can give a kind of a nuclear guarantee to Japan that in case Japan is threatened with nuclear weapons, India will immediately we will hold consultations to try and remove or mitigate that threat, and we can give it to Vietnam. These are the two pillars of an ancient balance of power system. Japan is already helping us in building infrastructure in the border areas of Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh, roads, tunnels, etc. It is helping us in a lot of other ways. and it is providing sophisticated radars for Andaman and Lakshadweep Island. So there is no limit to, the sky is the limit to the kind of cooperation. My simple point is that it is good that we are part of the Quad, it is good that we have good relations with the United States, but judging from recent performance, it would be unwise to put all our eggs in the American basket. We cannot afford to do that. Russia and France have been very reliable partners, and there is just no way that India can jettison them. For example, Russia is leasing us a second nuclear submarine. They are giving us 4 Krivak class frigates. They are giving us a lot of other military equipment, including the S-400 Triumph surface-to-air missile system, which has proved so effective in the Ukraine. So we cannot jettison those friends to join the American bandwagon and get what? America has refused to give you nuclear submarines. It is refusing to give you F-35 fighters, which it has offered to Australia and to Japan, members of the Quad. It wants to balance you with Pakistan. It is only offering you F-16s, which are now legacy technology. Even when we are prepared to pay money, will the Americans ever sell us or lease us a nuclear submarine? No way. So how then can we put all eggs in the American basket? All the more reason that India and Japan have to think long term and think strategically, and our alliance structure must be strengthened. We must increase people to people contact, military to military contact, contacts between the strategic establishments and community. We must have more exchange of scholars, retired military personnel and academics. This must take place on a regular basis. You see, India and Japan share a civilizational context. You see, we have the connection of the Buddha and the Buddhist faith with Japan. Apart from that, Vedic gods, Saraswati and Lakshmi, goddesses, they are all part of the Japanese pantheon. The fire ritual, the Havan ritual is part of the Japanese pantheon. The cultural contacts between India and Japan go back thousands of years, and they have been kept alive. It's not just very ancient history that we had contacts. Before our freedom struggle, the Japanese scholars came to India to try and help India regain its identity, re-establish itself as a free power. And then, we had Rash Behari Bose, who tried to instigate a revolt in India against the British but failed. He was given shelter where? By Japan. And then when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose went to Japan, he raised an Indian National Army of 60,000 men with the Japanese forces. The Japanese military and Indian National Army together attacked in Imphal and Kohima. Had they attacked in 43, possibly they would have taken India, freed, liberated India. But they waited and we lost a historical opportunity. And then, though we lost the battles of Imphal and Kohima, the Japanese and the Germans had so badly weakened the British Empire. And the very creation of the INA shook the loyalty of the 2.5 million strong British Indian Army. And when, after the war, in a foolish gesture of triumphalism, the British held the INA trials at the Red Fort to humiliate India and Indians, well, there was an explosion. There were riots in Delhi, Kolkata, Lahore, Mumbai, Karachi in support of the INA. And the British feared that the 25 lakh Indian soldiers could revolt any day against them, because they were so, taken up by the example of the inspiring example of the INA. So who helped you then? India helped you. Japan helped you. And India in turn helped Japan during the war crimes trials. It was the Indian judge, the only Indian judge who supported the Japanese, Radha Binod Pal. So these are household names in India and Japan. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Rash Behari Bose, the great support that Japan gave to India's freedom. And we are free only because of the help we got from Japan. I'm sorry, non-violence would not have made us free. So India and Japan have deep cultural and civilizational ties. Deep cultural and civilizational ties, and we need to strengthen them. Yes, there is an economic dimension also to Quad, which is extremely important, which cannot be, underestimated. The fact is that China, in its desire for domination and control, has been using the debt trap strategy to ensnare small countries like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and now Pakistan with its Belt and Road projects. It has ruined whichever country it has started these Belt and Road projects in, especially Sri Lanka. We can all see the dire economic straits that Sri Lanka is in due to the heavy debt trap. We can see the dire economic problems of Pakistan. With the help of this, we can offer a far more benign model of infrastructure building and support to the countries of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and also Central Asia, possibly the Middle East. We can do a lot of this work together. For example, India could have an oil pipeline from Oman coming to India, a gas pipeline, oil and gas pipeline, which would be of great value, inestimable value. There are so many other projects, building roads in Myanmar, railway lines in Myanmar, building roads and railway lines for connectivity to Central Asia in Iran. We've already built the Dilaranj highway to connect with Afghanistan with Iran and give it an outlet in the Chabahar port. We must do joint development possibly with Japan of the Chabahar port, and especially in island territories like Mauritius, like Madagascar, Mauritius, etc. There is so much that can be done jointly, and we can offer a more benign model than this rapacious debt trap model in which they first put the country heavily under debt, destroy its economy, and then take over on lease ports like Hambantota, like Hangvi and Gwadar as bases, virtual bases of the Chinese. So we have to be very alive to the fact that the Chinese threat is on the rise. The Chinese want to build a 5-carrier navy. They've already got 60 submarines, including more than 10 nuclear submarines. You see, and therefore we have to ensure that a balance is struck. The United States fleet is going down in size as far as principal combatants is concerned. So the American Navy is getting downsized. It had over 230 principal surface combatants of over 3,000 tons displacement in 1990. Today these are down to about 93 or 94. The Chinese have come up from just 16 to about 48, and they are going up and up and up. The Chinese Navy in numerical terms now outnumbers the American Navy, period. That is the harsh reality. And once Taiwan, the biggest constraint to Chinese expansion globally and regionally, the only constraint to China's global and regional expansion is the island state of Taiwan. And we have to see that Taiwan does not fall. Otherwise, it will seriously jeopardize the power balance in Asia. It will release a whole lot of Chinese military power for application against India and Japan and the countries of Southeast Asia. So that is a denouement that has to be avoided at all costs. America has to now come to conclusion regarding whether a policy of ambiguity will suit it or not. And regardless of what China does, my principal thesis is that the powers of Asia have to look for themselves. The only people who cannot leave Asia are India, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam. We can't leave South Asia and go. We also have to sensitize global public opinion against the rising trend of violating flagrantly the Toxins and Biological Warfare Convention of 1975 and trying to develop dangerous pathogens, weaponizing viruses. We saw COVID-19. We are still to determine whether it was a natural epidemic, accidental release or deliberate release. The whole investigation has been stymied. China is not the only country carrying out this research, so is the United States. It had about 320 odd laboratories in so many countries, especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Kazakhstan. They were experimenting on bat coronaviruses, avian flu, Congo Crimean fever, hemorrhagic fever, etc., etc. So this madness has to stop, and I think Quad must take it up as one of the things that the the biological warfare convention must now be strictly enforced. And India and Japan need to come together militarily. We already have a joint working group for defense and technological cooperation. We are carrying out a series of military exercises together, and we have to raise their level. We have to raise the level of engagement. Like I said, formal and informal engagement, both people to people contacts have to be increased. There are only 40,000 Indian expats in Japan and even lesser Japanese in India. This has to people contacts must increase. In conclusion, I would like to say that one of the primary lessons that has emerged from the Russia-Ukraine war is the need for trained military manpower. Russia is not short of weapons, it is short of manpower. Unfortunately, we in India are flush with youthful manpower, and we are cutting the size of our army by 2 lakhs. I think this is most dangerous. We need manpower, trained military, motivated military manpower, as also weapons. We cannot have an either or equation that we'll cut away manpower and fight with just weapons. Russia had no dearth of weapons. It had a serious shortfall in manpower, which has told. And if they have overcome and still managed to get their basal wartime objectives, it is only because of the tremendous amount of weapons that they had, the amount of money they have invested. So India, Japan, Quad countries need to raise their defense expenditure. Our defense expenditure is 2.1% of our GDP. We need 3% minimum. We are trying to cut manpowers, we are trying to cut corners. We have an air force which should be 45 squadrons, it is 28 to 30 squadrons now. In the army you have cut 2 lakhs of manpower, you want to cut more. I don't know, at this rate we must wake up and smell the coffee. All the Quad countries will have to increase their defense expenditure. The threats are increasing and defense expenditure has to rise. You can't have shortcuts. You can't have magical solution produced by finance ministry babus. They are not trained to fight wars and win wars. So we must now be ready for conflict if we wish to avoid or deter conflict. Thank you.